Hey people, what's good? Mount Lethe Hellfire. Today, as you could tell from the title of the video, I wanted to walk you through the installation of Elite Ammunition's HD recoil springs on an FNH PS90 SBR. As always, I'll include timestamps below so you could skip around. And anytime I introduce a weapon or a new weapon to the channel that I haven't, I like to give a bit of a setup overview and a brief history of the platform. And again, you could skip around with the timestamps if you just want to go to the install. And if the content's useful for you, I'd appreciate if you could like, drop a comment, share the video, subscribe, whatnot. So first off, this is a PS90, or I mean, you could call it a P90 if you want, doesn't really matter. This is the semi-automatic import version of the P90 SMG submachine gun or PDW personal defense weapon. It's a closed bolt, straight blowback weapon that is fully ambidextrous. It's got some goofy angles and apparently a lot of ergonomic research went into it, but when it's SBR'd like this, it's a really handy weapon. It has a very low recoil impulse, it has a downward feeding 50 round mag, and downward ejection. There's some aftermarket triggers, but even with this ugly Nerf trigger, it breaks about 6 pounds, and you could get on with it decently quickly if you train with it. And this is a purely novelty weapon. But it would be great if you were, maybe wheelchair bound, if you had upper body strength issues, maybe if you were smaller framed. The manual of arms is completely different than anything out there, but it can be trained. You could use UMP45 mag pouches for these or certain tacos as well, for the mag that is. And besides that, like I said, this is a novelty conversation type gun. And as far as the magazines, this is what they look like. Like I said, they top feed, and then you just smash them down. The bolt releases back here, and you would just strip that out. And again, 50 rounds is pretty neat, and this is chambered in 5.7 by 28. The selector is down here, so it is fully ambi, and that's about it. And then you have your charging handles on either side, and I've put an extended one on my weak side. Now, as far as how I set this up, I have a CMMG 10.4 barrel kit with the 1/2 by 28 adapter. So this is like the A2 birdcage style close-time Surefire flash hider, which is a suppressor mount as well. And the best video to watch on the barrel swap for a PS90 is from Armory of Kings. And they also carry a bunch of PS90 accessories. So this has been SBR'd for a few months. It took over 4 months for that E-form back in June 2024. And it's been engraved by Pen Armory Limited. The CEO actually personally answered me, set up a custom jig to engrave underneath the charging handle for me, and I think it was like 70 or 80 bucks with shipping both ways. Some other things that I've added to this, I already showed you. This is the Man Cave Specialties extended charging handle extension. I also installed a set of Doran Technologies side Picatinny rails to the receiver. Now, there is a tri-rail version of this, I believe, that has FN factory ones. Honestly, the side rails are useless or a bit useless. And most obviously at the top, if you couldn't tell already, this is a Acro P2 with the ADM QD mount. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I like doing a historical brief on any weapons. It might not be E.L. McCollum of forgotten weapon level of detail. If you're in the US and the West, or played any game like Call of Duty or Battlefield, or if you watch Stargate SG-1, this weapon is probably very obvious to you. It was also in some cheesy late 90s movies, I think like 007, Tomorrow Never Dies. It was in Taxi, Blade 2, and my personal favorite, it was in Equilibrium towards the end. That one has Christian Bale and Sean Bean in it, and not cheesy, except for the gun kata stuff. But hey, gun tubers and range theatric people like the gun kata stuff, so whatnot. Now the P90 is actually a very old weapon system, a lot older than it was, shown in like mid 2000s video games, and it's ahead of its time in certain aspects, just like other FN Herschel designs, like the F2000. You might remember that from the assault rifle on Halo. The Scar L, the Scar H, or the Scar 16 and Scar 17 now, and then of course the Scar 15P and the Scar 20. It was designed around the 5.7 by 28 millimeter cartridge, like I mentioned before, And the ergonomic research scientists, the researchers, the gunsmiths that started working on this actually worked on it in the mid 1980s, probably 86 or 87. And there was a solicitation for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, or in some online circles, NAFO. And it wasn't formalized, the requirements that weren't formalized until the publication of NATO Doc 296 in 1989. And the specifications in the trials were really around the replacement of the 9mm. NATO wanted a pistol and a PDW, or submachine gun, for last resort situations, but also for, support troops, support staff, think takers, helicopter pilots, fuelers, truck drivers, logistics folks, but also, for some special missions or special operations use cases. Because up until that point, what really dominated was, well, the Glock to a lesser extent at that time, but the MP5. The H&K MP5 was pretty much everywhere. Like, that was the subgun that everybody and their grandma used. Now, on top of replacing the 9mm, they wanted it to have more energy on target than plus P. They needed it to have longer effective ranges, and they wanted it to defeat body armor. But not just any body armor. They wanted it to defeat, Spetsnaz and VDV titanium armor. So essentially, what would today be like NIJ, like level 4 plates, they wanted it to defeat that. There was a bunch of design characteristics, like as far as the weight, like the pistol couldn't weigh, had to be 1.5 pounds or less. Obviously, it was in grams, but I'm just converting it because, well, I'm American. So 1.5 freedom units for the pistol, and then the PDW couldn't be heavier than 6.5 pounds. It had to have at least a 20-round magazine, and it had to be able to, stowable in small areas, like I said, cockpits, truck compartments, tank compartments, AFEs, IFEs, all that stuff. So F&H actually designed the cartridge first, I believe. It was called the SS-190. And it had a 40-grain aluminum steel cored round, and it would spit them things at like 2,800 feet per second because you needed that energy because it was so light to defeat body armor. But it wasn't completed until 93, and, well, the trials got pushed out. The Soviet Union collapsed. You had proxy wars break out all over parts of the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Lesser Caucasus, the Central Asian Steppe. Some of it was, post-Soviet. Some of it was American intervention. Some of it was independence movements. And then, of course, you had NATO intervention and the Yugoslavian war. So while the Belgians did technically answer the call to design this weapon around that specification, it just took a really, really long time until they looked at it again. And that was until 97. NATO published the AC-225, I believe it was called, which was based on the European Staff Target publication on PDWs, which came out in mid-1996. So, nearly 10 years later, they kind of revised the characteristics, but even then, it still took a couple years for the PDW trials based on those standards to actually kick off. Now you have to fast forward all the way to 2002 for the NATO PDW trials. They occurred in Britain, held by the NATO NAG, NATO Army Armaments Group. It was a colossal shit show because of European ethnopolitics and, shenaniganry. At that point, we were already in Afghanistan. While the Europeans might have not have known it, we were also planning for the invasion of Iraq or Syria by November 2002. So that coalition was about to get dragged on out of there, whether they knew it or not. Holding trials in the middle of a war of your biggest armor supplier, really the United States, and your biggest backer of NATO, to replace the very popular and very ubiquitous and like mass-produced 9mm, well, that was pretty stupid. The U.S. didn't even enter into the trials. This is pretty much all European, mostly the Belgians with F&H, the Germans with H&K, and the British, I believe, had a couple different entries. Anyway, the trials were an absolute shit show. The P90, the ammunition actually lost out in most of the criteria to the 4.6. The 5.7 rounds to feed reliably inside of this freaking crazy mag, you could imperceptibly pick it up. These are actually dry filmed with dry film lubricant that's on all the cases, which also makes these kind of dangerous to reload. just because of their size and whatnot, but also pretty hard. And there are dedicated reloaders for it. But there is a submersion test as part of AEP 97, I believe, is the standard for ammunition weapons handling, where it gets submerged in water, which, well, could happen. It gets submerged in diesel or JP8 or whatnot, which could, well, that happens a lot, honestly, in the military. You know, getting diesel poured on you or having your stuff dropped into diesel is really not that uncommon, actually, thinking back to a lot of occasions. But it stripped the dry film lubricant and it led to feeding issues. I believe the only criteria that the 5.7 beat the 4.6 on was velocity, but none of the rounds came close to defeating the body armor, so they pretty much dropped that. They were going to pick the 5.7, actually. They were going to pick the P90 and the FN57 pistol, but the Germans were like, oh, wait, you know, Klaus is working on the new Wunderwaffe weapon, new ammunition. And they delayed the adoption, they delayed the trials. The Germans played for time, but honestly, HK is just so ingrained within the American defense industrial base. They have the biggest domestic, well, European domestic defense industrial base. And I guess you could say the Germans end up winning. The MP7 and P90 were both adopted by a lot of militaries and law enforcement, but given that the American military, which was the prominent force during the GWAT, right? We adopted the 416, we adopted the 417, we adopted the MP7 in certain units, and obviously, you know, other further adoptions of those weapons turned out, right? Like the M27 IAR at the Marine Corps, the CSAS, right, based on the G28, which is based on the HK417 for the M110A1, even though you don't really see them getting distributed to military units all that often. So to add a little bit of extra credit, I'm already yapping enough. While all this was going on, the Russians ended up doing something equally as goofy, in my opinion, and they're like, let's get the 9mm ammo that they want to replace, and turned it into the 7N31, which is a like plus P armor piercing 9mm round. They developed the PP2000 around it, which is like, ooh, bad guy gun. And that ended up being replaced now by the PPK20 and the Vitязь. I believe only the Vitязь is being used, but I've seen, you know, a decent amount of like FOV, Spetsnaz, guards, battalion dudes running around, you know, poking holes in Ukrainians and Wahhabis and Syrians and other foreign mercs with it. That it's like, well, I guess it works. I mean, now it's back to the PS90, right? It was not brought into the American market, or, well, it wasn't put in the Belgian export market right away. It took until 2006. They're still available. I still see them. You know, maybe not as much as I did in the mid 2000s, but, you know, I bought this one in 2013. It's a 2011 import model. It's actually the oldest gun, or the gun that I've owned the longest, if you care about that. I just never really could compel myself to sell it just because it's so unique and goofy looking. And now the only thing I would say that sucks about these when they're SBR is shooting them suppressed. And that is because, again, it's a straight blowback design. There's no gas system in here really to speak. And the action length, since it's a bullpup, is very, very short. So any extra gas you add in the system, even with the heavy weight, which is essentially the cyclic rate retarder on these, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a second, it adds way too much gas, and that gives you a lot of issues when this thing is cycling. So some, you know, because the rounds are sitting up here like this, if the bolt cycles too quick, this will act, since this has to come full 90, if your bolt is cycling so fast, it'll actually cycle right past the round before it even drops in, which is, you know, literally milliseconds, and the bolt could overrun it. So I was having issues with that. The other issue, on top of, you know, failures to load because it's cycling too quick before this round is presented to you, is that it has to be extremely precise. So look at this barrel. There's no M4 extension. There's no feed ramps. There's nothing else in the gun here. So you need to get that tiny round in this hole perfectly. And what ends up happening is that, you know, the rounds will impact the side of the barrel. They'll come in at an angle. And, you know, the brass is so thin. These are such small rounds that, like, you'll crush them. So when I was shooting this, I think in a mag of 50, I destroyed probably half of the rounds firing it with my RC2, which people don't recommend shooting with the RC2 because it can't stabilize, but I didn't have any issues. So that's what brings us up to this video for installing the recoil spring. Now, Elite Ammunition, like I mentioned, recommends either doing the 3-ounce tungsten insert or the HD springs, which are here, and they add 20 to 25% spring rate. You don't install both, otherwise, well, you're just not going to cycle it at all. Like I mentioned, without something like an increased spring rate or weights on the carrier itself, the reciprocating mass, you're just going to induce a ton of stovepiping, failure to loads, failure to feeds. It's just going to be a real pain in the ass for you. Now, to complete this conversion is honestly pretty simple. The only thing you need are these Knipex. Can I get this? Yeah. So these 4611 A0, so they're for 3 to 11 millimeter snap rings, and because there's, well, snap rings on this. Now, I've seen people use channel locks and vice grips and whatnot to get them out and not bend them, but there's only one company out there that sells replacement snap rings that they had to custom make for the PS90. You don't want to bend them at all, right? And as far as like what should you use, the insert or the springs, I think the springs are honestly the better choice because the tungsten insert only adds an additional 1.7 ounces, which may be enough, but they're almost $250 because it's freaking machined tungsten. And the different generations of the PS90 have different internal geometries for the insert in the bolt carrier group. And then the other thing that you'll need is, this is a 3D printed jig from Elite Ammunition to hold the bolt carrier group as well. Now, disassembly is very easy. All you have to do is hit this button. You want to make sure that the weapon's clear. And you can see that it is. Just press down the button, and the whole thing just falls out, and that's it. And you can see here what I was talking about. This is the insert. So different generations, I think, had different inserts. This is the one that would be on a full auto carrier as well. And then, the tungsten one from Elite Ammunition, after you disassemble this thing, you would just put it over in here. And like I said, the internal geometries of this are a little different, and I don't want to be filing on tungsten, and it's very expensive. I think these springs are like 30, 40 bucks. So that's it. And you can see how this recoil assembly works. Nothing really too crazy about it. Then as far as getting it in the jig, you want to get, this forward part over here. I should have worn some gloves. This thing is disgusting. I don't know when I cleaned this last. And then you just want to press it forward, and then this little tail will be over here. And then you can see up at the top, this is where the little snap rings are. So I got this mostly cleaned up. So you can see here where the snap rings, or these rings, where they are on these recoil rods inside of the bolt carrier assembly. And these spin pretty much freely. Right? If you have issues spinning these freely, your thing is just probably bone dry. And sorry, trying to keep this thing still. So that's why you want to use the Knipex, right? Nice and easy, just to course these out. And you could probably get a better impression of why it's so easy to damage these with needle nose. Now, there's a groove that's inside of the assembly here, this channel, where this stops again. So this pretty much prevents these from, well, flying out of the bolt carrier group. And then when we remove these, we'll just pull this whole assembly apart. These two rods will just, pull right out. We'll take out the spacer, and you're going to want to reinstall this default one that comes with it, or remove these springs, and then, and then we'll attach these new springs. So bear with me while I get it. You probably won't be able to see it. Now, as far as getting these things out, you just want to get the points of the Knipex into the channel to spread them apart. And now you can see that I cleared all the gunk out of it. It's a lot easier to see where it starts. Now, it's easy for these things to slide off. I was trying to do it off camera before and struggling mightily to do it. Recommendations I've seen from other people is, like, once you extended it kind of to here, you kind of see how it's like bowing out, is to try to rotate them up and away. I haven't gotten the hang of it, so I'll probably cut out a significant part of the video while I got them off. One of them I bent a little bit, but when you get them back in the channel, you could just, squeeze them down. It's as long as they're not like loose and rattling. They need to be partially in the channel. All right, so now that it's back, well, now everything's out of there, you just want to push the carrier back towards the rear here. And be very careful as you get this thing out, because it's going to want to shoot out at you. And just let it go. And you see, that's pretty much it. All right, now that it's apart, you don't need to remove the rods from this insert. And just remember the orientation of kind of how it all goes together, right? Where you have your spacer in there, and if you were to install a spacer, this is where you would do it. But all you need to do is just get these old springs out of there, probably re-lubricate these, and then get the new springs on. And there is a correct orientation for these. They taper off towards the top, so if you just can't slide them on, you know, like here, just rotate them, right? Everything's good. Keep this handy again. You just want to feed this back in, and then over at this part with the insert, just have it in the channel ready to receive that rod. And it's probably worth mentioning you should wear safety goggles or something with this, just so you don't smash yourself in the eye. Then get it back in the jig in this first part. You're going to want to get the Knipex in here, down towards the lower base. Try to make sure they're even. Just apply good pressure. Then slide them down, and then boom. Go ahead and push this down, get it out of there, and we're good. And then you just reassemble the weapon. Nothing too crazy. Just push that back at the channel. Push the button down. And here you go. All right, folks. Well, that's all she wrote. Sorry for all the cuts and the jankiness. I hope you found the video informative and, well, helpful. And if you did, again, I'd appreciate a like, comment, sharing. Consider subscribing. I have a lot more videos to do on gear, the PS90 SBR, the Draco I need to bring back on, probably show the 300 blackout, do suppressor comparison there, a 308 suppressor comparison and whatnot, as I have time to hit the range. And as always, folks, look, man, if you're going through bad times, anything bad happening, you should talk to somebody, you know, especially if you need help. It doesn't need to be monetary. I'm not saying you need to go and talk to a therapist or whatnot, but you know, don't feel ashamed for yourself. I was going through some crap before, personal issues, and you know, that's why I got away from the channel. But look, feel free to reach out to me if you ever need somebody to talk to and whatnot. And also, if you thought that the audio got a little bit better, let me know, because I invested in a DJI Mic 2 for the channel, and I have a trigger cam on the way as well. Anyway, take it easy, be safe, stay in shape, and I'll see you in the next one. Mount Let the Hellfire.